Marxist criticism can be of great interest to a lot of people because it deals a lot with power and class and politics, and that is something that a lot of people are very much interested in. So I hope that you guys will enjoy learning this new literary theory this week. So, Marxist criticism was developed by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels in the late 1840s. They did not come up with this as a means of literary interpretation, but they just came up with, they wrote the Communist Manifesto. That's a pretty popular work that they worked on together. So they wrote that, and they just came up with, an idealized idea of society and what it should be like and what it should not be. And then, of course, people then have applied that to literary theory. So let's see here. So what are the basics? They are very concrete. They're very scientific and logical. They focus on the material and do not believe in the spiritual. So they don't believe that we as humans are spiritual beings. They believe that everything is material. And so when they investigate something, it's always explainable. It is always logical. It's always concrete, something that you can see or feel or touch. Whereas, of course, we know that spirituality is very different from that. So they shun the spiritual and really focus on the concrete. They also view history not just as a series of events, but as a very long struggle of class. And if you think back, really, there is quite a bit of logic to that. I think of the medieval period, which I love to study, and how there was so much conflict, and really a lot of it was created because of class distinctions. And then if you come forward in time, it's the same way. There are a lot of class conflicts, and that is how they view history. It's not just isolated events that happen. For various reasons, they see that there's a great struggle between the upper classes and the lower classes, and that conflict has created the history that we now study. They also view the author in light of their social class and how that social class of the author comes through their work, and they look and examine the text to see what that text says about the author's class. That's similar to biographical interpretation, where you look at a text and say, oh, well, the author had this experience, and I see this experience coming out in the text in this way. So they're doing the same thing. They say that an author, of course, is created in a context of class and culture, and then that class and culture of the author is, of course, going to come through their writing because it's a part of who they are. Therefore, the text is going to be very much related to the author. So by examining the text and analyzing it, you can understand the class of the author through reading that. One example that I think of with this is Edith Wharton in her book, The House of Mirth. So she is from the upper class, and when you read that book, you can feel that, the way that she describes things and the experiences of the heroine. And yet by the end, you realize that class comes crumbling down. And so it makes you wonder, okay, well, is this just isolated to the protagonist herself, or is that a reflection of Wharton, the author? So again, it's very logical that you cannot take the author out of the context in which they're writing. So this is just a different way that you can look at it. This is similar to New Historicism, which we are going to learn about soon as well. It's the idea that a text is written in a certain historical context, and that context cannot be separated from the text itself. So a text cannot be free of the context in which it was written historically, and in the Marxist case, class or society-wise. Also, Marxists really dislike capitalism because they view capitalism as a hierarchy where very few people have all the power, and they exert that power over the lower classes. And we can see that in our own culture. We can see that in other cultures throughout the world, where very few powerful people make the decisions for everybody. So even though we're a democratic society, you can still see that happening even in our own culture. So again, people who are really interested in politics and how things work together and create social classes are really, really interested in this theory. Also, the idea of commodification. You have to investigate where value lies. Think about human beings. When humans are not viewed as humans and are simply viewed as commodities, something to be sold or traded or taken advantage of, that is commodification. It works with the arts as well. Do you view a piece of art as simply something to exchange and to gain something from, or do you view a piece of art as something with intrinsic value, that it has value in and of itself, not to be traded or gain something from, but simply because it exists? I think I often decry most modern literature because that's what I see. I see a lot of writing, not for writing's sake or art's sake, but to make a buck. You think of, these serial novels that literally the publishers say, this is the formula that we want in these books. Who's going to write it for us? And that's how they publish them. That is not literature. So commodification is a big part of Marxist criticism, and either people or objects being used as a commodity as opposed to finding value in them in and of itself. Another basic of Marxist criticism is finding revolutionary moments within a text, either to see how revolution is working within the text, or to see if the text itself can spark a revolution in society. So that really puts a lot of power and emphasis on literature and the power it can have to change. That's one aspect of Marxist criticism I really love. The value is truly, truly placed on a text, and the power it can have within a culture or a society. So there are actually two different types of criticism that followed Marx's and Engels' work. So the Leninist criticism and the Engelsian, there we go, criticism are offshoots from what Marx and Engels did. Remember, they did not come up with this as a literary theory. They came up with this as a social idea that should be applied in order to help people to be more equal. Okay, so these are offshoots. So this is occurring from about the 1920s to the 1960s, if I remember correctly. So after the revolution, the Soviet Revolution, and Lenin was in power, the Marxist criticism that was encouraged was that literature became, as Barry calls it, an instrument of the party. Its sole purpose was to further the party's ideas, and at this time, this is communism. Communism has, I think, some really negative connotations. So when you go back to Marx and Engels' Communist Manifesto, that's an idealized idea, whereas Lenin tried to put that into practice. And we, as Latter-day Saints, understand the law of consecration, which, at its core is actually communism, where everybody works together for the betterment of everyone else and everybody's equal, this and that. But communism, as you may know if you studied history, just really did not work. People did not like being told how and where they could live. They did not like having to work and get the same pay as somebody who did not work and got the same pay. They did not like being told what color car they could have. I've seen pictures of Soviet Russia, and it is very, very bleak and very drab and it's just almost oppressively sad, because accountability is taken away and all that control is exerted over the people. And so this came out in literature too. State had complete control over all of the art and all of the literature, and those who wrote to further the party. So you might call that propaganda. And that was their purpose, was to simply further the agenda of the Soviet Party. So that happened in the 1930s. Marx and Engels probably would not have appreciated that. That is not what they would have intended. They, from what I've read, they really did have great intentions with the work that they did, but Lenin just took a little too far. So while all of this is going on, there was an underground movement, and that's where the Engelsian Marxist criticism comes from. They viewed art as freedom of expression. They did not want to be controlled by the state. They were much more into viewing literature as a beautiful piece of work that was to be valued by itself. And there's a quote in Peter Berry's book that I wanted to read that really kind of discusses my philosophy on literature as a whole. It says, one of the chief effects of literary language is that of making the familiar world appear new to us, as if we were seeing it for the first time, and thus laying it open to reappraisal. So that is why I like literature. So even though I don't normally practice Marxist criticism, I don't tend to look at power struggle and class and things like that, but I very much do appreciate that literature is set apart and that it's different and that it portrays life in a whole new way that gives so much meaning and so much emphasis. And I really appreciated that. So I also wanted to mention this second form of criticism because it's very, very similar to formalism, which you have studied earlier in the semester. So this group of folks is called the Russian formalists. And these folks were influential in the new criticism, again, that you've already studied about. So let me read this quote to you from Berry. So some of the members were influential in the movement known as New Criticism, which built upon a number of these Russian formalist ideas, especially those concerning the need for close verbal analysis of literary texts and the special recognition of literary language as a medium with its own characteristics that set it aside from day-to-day language. So while the Leninist critics, really used it to further their political aspirations, that the underground movement that was going on at the same time with the Russian formalists really looked at the text itself, and they did a close formal reading. They looked at the form, the language, everything that you've already looked at. So you can hopefully relate to this a little bit. I also wanted to mention this to, again, demonstrate that these theories are not created in isolation. They are not developed in isolation. They are they relate to one another and they respond to one another. Marxists often denounce psychoanalytic criticism. There we go, because they view that, as I've already said, that a text is created in a context and it cannot be separated from that. And so psychoanalysis tends to do that. It takes the literature out of the context in which it was written and looks only at, whatever psychoses might be going on in the text. And so the Marxists don't like that. So just think of this as like a dialogue. There are, various different theories, and they all respond to each other in one way or another for the most part. So here we've got the Russian formalists who made way to new criticism, which you've already learned about. So I thought that would be a cool little tidbit for you to know. So these days, what are Marxists up to? In Marx and Engels' work, they found pretty much a one-on-one correspondence between cause and effect. So one effect is being affected by only one cause, whereas Marxists today view multiple causes into one effect. Also, they look at literature or culture, I suppose, as a way of determining what the values are within a society. So status quo is, the way things are. So by looking and investigating a culture, you can see what the status quo is simply by looking at it. They also like to investigate social control because sometimes it can be so natural and so status quo that it's almost invisible to recognize. So they look for those hidden meanings within texts. This is one theory that started again with Marx and Engels in the late 1800s and has just kind of morphed and changed, and there's so many different facets to it. There's so much more we could talk about, but I just wanted to again give a little more insight to what you're reading online. So if you were curious as to what some good texts might be, and these are like, you could probably do Marxist criticism with just about anything, but these texts they're just, you can't not see the Marxist elements going on within them. So George Orwell's Animal Farm in 1984. I've read both of those in the last few months, and they, oh my goodness, after reading both of them, it's a little depressing. So I don't recommend reading them, back to back like I did, because they're very heavy. But the power struggles that go on within them are so blatantly Marxist that if you're really struggling with this theory and you've read any of these books, you can go, oh, that's Marxism. Or at least that's what Marxism is trying to do or trying to prevent. Fahrenheit 451. And you also notice a lot of these are the dystopian novels, and that is a huge trend in literature right now, especially young adult literature. So this is all Marxist theory. Hopefully it'll feel familiar with these examples. So again, Fahrenheit 451. Everybody's being controlled. Everybody's watching screens and being told what they can and cannot think, and books have been destroyed. Marxism! Lord of the Flies, The Hunger Games, the Divergent series, all of those are all very easy to use Marxist criticism in order to understand. Think of the Hunger Games. You've got the different districts, and even though there is a class struggle because at the Capitol, they're all rich and wealthy and dress crazy and have funny accents. But even within the districts, there's a hierarchy going from 1 to 13 doesn't even exist anymore, or so they think, of course. But you look at District 12 and compare it to District 1, and they're very different. District 1 is much more wealthy. And then when you think in terms of the games themselves, the careers from Districts 1, 2, and 3 are always, they tend to be more successful because they have more money. So that's something that a Marxist critic would see. Look at all the different power struggles and what does it mean? And what does it mean for a girl and a boy from District 12, the underprivileged, to go and conquer and overcome the higher classes? What message is that trying to send? So again, I wanted to bring up these examples because they're very easy to see through the lens of Marxist criticism. So hopefully that adds a little insight to your reading. So if you have any questions, Marxist criticism can, I think it's like all theories, you can get really in depth and get really good different terms that they use and very specific things that they look for. But overall, look for class, look for power, look for money, look for how people and things are treated as a commodity, things like that. It's very fascinating when you look at a work in this way. So I hope this adds a little bit more information than what you've read. And if you have any questions or want to discuss anything, you know where to find me.